Welcome to the Farming on Purpose podcast, a podcast for farmers and ranchers ready to shift for a stronger future. Today's challenges in agriculture are new, but the grit and determination required to be successful are not. On the Farming on Purpose podcast, you'll hear how producers of all sizes and practices are moving mountains for things they believe in, all in the name of an industry that keeps growing and innovating for a stronger food system and stronger farm families. I'm your host, Lexi Wright, and I'm excited to discuss where producers are finding success, challenging the status quo, striving for better, and keeping our heritage alive, all while producing the food we depend on. Hey there, it's Lexi, and I am sliding into this podcast episode with an opportunity for those who are interested in it. The last time that you sat down to plan your marketing, do you know when it was? Was it hard? Were you confused? Did you feel like you actually should be working on your business instead of trying to make social media posts or write emails or design ads? If that's you, I created a system to develop a full year's marketing strategy and a plan to implement it in 8 hours or less. Yes, really, 8 hours, one day. Sit down, plan all of your marketing for the entire year, and actually have the things in place so you can implement it, not just a really pretty outline on a calendar. So you'll walk away with a roadmap for your marketing activities for the next 12 months, confidence in knowing exactly what to do and when to do it, and more time to focus on actually running your business instead of worrying about your marketing. So if you are tired of just winging it or getting stressed out by trying to remember to do your marketing, check out this offer. You can find out when it's ready at farmingonpurpose.com/plan. farmingonpurpose.com/plan. I'd love to see you there. Welcome back to Farming on Purpose. Today, I have DL Lautenbach with me, and I'm really excited to have him back on the podcast. DL was actually one of our early interviews and one of you guys' favorite interviews, so I'm really excited to have him back. Last time, we talked about his personal journey in getting started farming and transitioning to kind of figure out what that looked like to best fit his family, for them to be productive, profitable, and make it work for their family. So I really appreciated you sharing that experience and journey, DL. And today I'm excited to dive into some of the more nitty-gritty issues that we're all up against in agriculture today. So welcome back. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about what's hot on your mind right now? We love watching you on TikTok. So fill us in what you're passionate about right now.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Lexi. It's just a pleasure to be back. Right now, probably the biggest thing on my mind, not on the farm necessarily, but in my social media page is the mental health of the small farmer. And we're bombarded by media of what farming is supposed to look like. And for 90% of us, it doesn't look like that. You know, it looks a lot smaller and a lot more labor intensive. And I think people get so frustrated and they get behind. And I've tried to help that demographic, see that they aren't insignificant and see that they're, these little victories that we accomplish in those first 10 or 15 years of farming are so critical, and we can build on them and to not give up.
Yeah. When we were first talking, you shared some statistics about those small farmers, and I'd love for you to share those again because I think it's really validating to hear them.
Okay. Well, I'm in the cattle business, so 72% of cattle owners in America have less than 50 cows. 91% or 89% have less than 100 cows. And these are going to be people. Most of us work off the farm, either part-time or full-time, and most of us aren't putting money into mega agriculture. We're not buying $500,000 John Deere sprayers, and we're not putting in robotic farming equipment. We're not buying puts. We're not buying calls. We're just people getting by, driving that extra mile to save 30 cents on diesel. And we're shopping at the grocery outlet store instead of the boutique place, just trying to feed the family and pay the bills every day.
That 91% of people having less than 100 cows is not the picture that is painted by mainstream media. I would say to consumers or to us in the industry. And it makes you feel like it keeps you on the outside, I would say. I'll say it that way. What does that do to the industry as a whole when we feel that way and when that's what we're preaching in the mainstream media?
Well, I think a lot of not just agriculture media, but media in general, what are they selling? They're selling cruises, they're selling credit cards, on down the line, commercialism. And if you talk to anybody in their later years in life, they'll tell you, I wish I would have maybe not worked less, but I would have eliminated a lot of stress from my life, spent more time with my family. And that doesn't sell a lot of advertising. And so probably the thing that frustrates me the most on TikTok, I had one the other day. Guy gets on and says, well, if you don't have 500 cows, don't even bother. And that's just so frustrating to me because I've dealt with that stuff and you buy into those attitudes, you're starting to push yourself down a slippery slope. For me, it was alcohol, gambling, and a lot of debt. And so I wasted 20 of my most productive years believing, if I wasn't stroking a big deal, I was a nobody. And then why even bother? And so like at 40 with a couple little kids and a looming bankruptcy, I went back to the basics and I had 5 borrowed hutches. I had 5 Holstein bull calves that I owed a guy from church for. I didn't have the $200 to buy them. And I was embarrassed that that's where I was at in farming because I had been, running 300-400 head through the feedlot. And then I realized the joy I derived from just feeding calves and being in the cattle. And then my kids were around and I was able to feed calves with my kids. And this was such a complete takeoff from where I had been in life. And honestly, I was thinking about it this morning. I used to just love getting my dairy magazines. And my best friend and I, we would sit up till midnight talking about, this technology and this program and this, huge dairy and what these people were accomplishing. And since I've started this journey of getting rich slow instead of getting rich quick, I don't even read those magazines anymore because I realize there's nothing in there for me. Puts and calls and giving your cows shots 2 or 3 times to get them bred and all that stuff. It's not, it is for that 9% that is over there. That's great. You go do that. But I've seen a lot of people ruin their lives. Again, a guy gets on my TikTok and just tells me, just don't even bother if you don't have 500 cows. And that's a shame. And I applaud you and a lot of the other small people on social media for actually getting out there and making people aware of that.
Well, I think it's a great conversation to have because like you mentioned, there's not a lot of people talking about it, not having those conversations, not putting that information out there for the little guys or the small ones, the ones who are, I want to say, in between homesteading and medium-sized businesses where they're at least employing maybe 1 or 2 full-time people. And that's a tough place to be. It feels like a really small area or a small zone, but it's actually a lot bigger than we realize. We're all just as scared to admit it. I think one of the things that you have talked about on there is, being okay with your place and your lot, I think is the way you say it. How do you get to that point? How do you stop comparing? How do you kind of reassort your priorities so that you can find that happiness with where you're at and find that productivity with where you're at versus always looking up?
Well, so much of that is just telling the truth. A lot of us ignore the truth. And, at some point, sooner or later, everybody has to grow up, right? Growing old is mandatory. Growing up is optional. But being willing to say, here's where I'm at, honestly, is a very, very hard to, because then you have to own the mistakes you've made. When you're 40 years old and you're bankrupt, you've got to own the fact that you screwed up, and that is a journey that not a lot of people want to take. And I think a lot of my TikToks go right at people and hit them in places where they don't want to go. And then you'll see pushback and you realize I may be scratched off a scab that they've been trying to get over with. And so one of the biggest complaints I hear constantly is, big corporations buying all the land, and land is too expensive. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes we don't want to say, well, the reason I'm not farming on the family farm is because of X. Grandpa was an alcoholic, or my dad had anger management issues, or, I've been a screw off, or, most people don't want to go there. Mm-hmm. I found out later, quite recently, that back in the 50s, my grandfather, who was a very successful dairyman, came from Holland in 1947 and retired in today's money, a multimillionaire in the late 60s. And I found out after the fact that he had tried to take his own life his first year of farming here because he had a bad team of horses.
Wow.
And the sad part was that my aunt was 70 years old. And she asked my mom, this is after my dad had passed, hey, did Grandpa, was there a time? And my mom said, yeah, he got to the point he couldn't take it anymore. And some of his friends sent him on a vacation. He went away for 3-4 weeks and they bought him a tractor. And that got kind of shoved under the rug, and probably for good reason. But yeah, my aunt at 70 years old did not know that her dad had gone to a place like that.
Wow.
And later on in life, I had some uncles that were alcoholics, and my dad wanted out of there. And then my dad was in, my mom and dad loved each other, but there was a fair bit of yelling and whatnot. And so when I come along, my dad was the barn was his fortress of solitude. Mm. So I'm an 8-year-old kid. I come in and I'm fired up about farming, and I go, why don't we do this? And I think my dad just thought, I'm not going to let this kid come into my fortress of solitude. And so over the next 7-8 years, this became a very combative, argumentative, a very unhealthy relationship, which is sad because my dad and I both love cows. We both love sports, but I think he felt threatened. I don't know about threatened, but I think he just didn't want any shit excuse my French. He just didn't want any crap in the barn.
Yeah.
I think he's like, I'm getting enough crap in the house. I'm not taking crap in the barn. Yeah. And so that's why I didn't end up with a family farm. And, so then I was an angry young man, very talented, very hardworking, went through some legal troubles and some debt troubles, and was able to always work hard enough to pay those bills. But I didn't end up in the family farm, and it would be easy to blame corporations. It would be easy to blame greedy parents. I mean, go on and on. And the fact of the matter is, it was a combination of mental illness, not mental illness, but depression, And then there was some alcoholism, and then there was some anger management, and fill in the blanks. And this is so common. This is probably the root of 90% of our problems, whether they're marital or financial, is a lot of us don't want to deal with that stuff because it scrapes down to the very, very, it scrapes deep. I wouldn't say that I was ever suicidal, but I did think about it. And, it's pretty rare for someone to want to go there and admit that. And then, but I'll also get on and say, okay, I've been there. And now here's where I'm at. So TikTok has been able to follow me kind of in real time in that journey. So like I said, it started with 5 borrowed hutches, 5 cabs not paid for, and a pile of debt. And I was able to, with bottle cabs, build a little situation where I'm not wealthy, but I don't have to work for the man. And it looks like we'll be able to retire someday. And that was just done with such, very incremental steps that a lot of people don't pat you on the back while you're making those steps.
Mm-hmm. Just being able to retire in ag is a feat. So you're doing good things there. I think there's a lot of things you said there that, like you said, it cuts right to the root of so many of the challenges that are going on with generational transition and figuring out how we keep people on family farms, that there's not an easy solution for it because it's different for everybody, but it's the same for everybody. And I think there's a lot of things that we pay attention to. Like you mentioned, you quit reading that Dairyman magazine because there wasn't anything in it for you. But what should we be paying attention to as maybe your small family, medium-sized business as we try to make a go of it?
Well, there is media out there, that I recommend, like Graze Online and Grass Farmer Stockman. The last couple of years, I've been a little frustrated with Grass Farmer Stockman because they've got a little bit, and so this is a problem I also have, is when someone belittles another part of agriculture to try to sell their product. Mm-hmm. It really frustrates me when someone belittles a conventional dairyman, a conventional rancher, and his only purpose is to sell another half of beef for more money. And I'm like, we've got bigger problems, right? We all farmers have to stay together. So there's this, there are corporate farmers, and there are grass farmers, and there are better ways to be more ecologically friendly. There are ways to have less stressful farming. But at the end of the day, we cannot be throwing other farmers under the bus. And so I've dealt with that on TikTok, and that's gotten quite interesting a few times. And so I think on New Year's Day, I did a little deal, and I says, today is the day of insignificance. And if you're a small farmer and you started the year with 6 cows, did you make it to 7? Right? Nobody's going to pat you on the back for going from 6 cows to 7, but that's a 16% increase. And in the way cattle prices were last year, right? And so if you could do 16% a year, my goodness, you could start at 40 and retire at 65. Mm. It's not going to look like a lottery commercial, but you could retire and use a handful of cows to help pay for your retirement. So what we should be paying attention to, and again, this goes back to telling the truth. So the truth of the matter is, did you start with 6 cows last year and $10,000 of credit card debt. Then if you got to the first of this year with 7 cows and $8,000 worth of credit card debt, you really had a pretty good year. Yeah. And if you can keep doing that, but meanwhile, who's patting you on the back, right? I mean, the social media is telling you if you're not spraying with a $500,000 sprayer, milking cows with a robot, you're insignificant, which technically you are. So then you just, you have to lean on your family, you have to lean on your faith, and you have to admit everybody else out there is in the same boat. Even those, like I'll go back to my guy with all the Kloss choppers. His brother-in-law got ran over by a feed truck and lost both his legs. Mm-hmm. And his sister has adopted a bunch of foster kids. And they have problems just like the rest of us. And it's easy to look at, the guy standing there next to his big new chopper and think there's a guy who's got it figured out. And if you could admit that everyone has problems, everybody's dealing with the same stuff, and then get down to the core of where you're at. And again, did you pay off $2,000 of debt and add on a cow? God bless you. Keep going. I'll try to cheer for you. Lexi will try to cheer for you. There's a tremendous amount of hope there. So.
Absolutely. That perspective and continuously resetting your perspective to pay attention to those big wins that seem like really small wins when you're in the middle of it is really hard to do on a day-to-day basis. But I think one thing that you do a good job of on your TikTok is telling really good stories that help us put things in perspective and think about maybe things historically and how they frame where we're at today and how we see the world and our place in it. What are some of the things that have made a big difference for you to help you keep that perspective and continue to push yourself to see things positively like that?
Well, there is the truth, right? That's where you start from. So back to my youth, I was, very talented, right? I won the state dairy judging contest. I won it, I went to nationals 3 or 4 times in FFA, all this talent, but me and my dad were fighting like cats and dogs, and that led to, me drinking. So it's hard to not constantly say, wow, did I ever screw up? And I'm that guy, right? I think about, the bosses I had when I was 19 or 20, and I was a turd, here at 57, I'm still going back and like, oh, I can't believe I did this or did that. But you have to go to where, at 40, it was a different truth. And, so compare, and again, are you better today than you were yesterday? That ultimately is where you have to go. But then you also have to temper that with, you can only accomplish so much. And so I find myself once in a while struggling with not doing anything for a day. And it's like, well, there's stuff I could be doing, but it costs money.
Yeah.
So I have to, find ways to either make that money so I can do the project, or I do have to sit tight. And that's there's a time to work and there's a time to not work. And winters are hard.
Yeah.
Winters are very, very hard because anything you try to accomplish in the winter, stuff tends to get broken. It costs money. So if you want to feed a lot of cattle, it's not that expensive in the summer, but it's very expensive in the winter. If you want to get in the trucking industry, it's not very expensive in the summer, but it can get really expensive in the winter. So when do When do you sit back and say, I've just got to, like I would love to be buying more cattle. I love that. That's my favorite thing in the world. And I have to sit and say, the best thing I can do today is feed the cattle I've got and let them grow. And we have to do that with our kids. We have to do that with our relationships. We have to do that with our retirement. Sometimes we just have to sit back, relax, let them grow. And it's hard to do when the world is pushing you, and it makes parenting hard, right? I mean, the other kids are whatever, they're reading at a third grade level and you have a child reading at a second grade level. Right? Boy, it'd be nice to push a button. A lot of parents reach out for a pill. What can I give this kid? What, could I give him Ritalin? Could I give him this? Could I give him that? And in reality, the kid just needs years, needs time, and he needs your time. So there you go. So I'm gonna tell you a story about that. And this goes back to my dad and how the family worked and operated. So at 6 years old, my dad watched his dad get taken out of the milk barn by the Nazis with a gun. Okay, so we never had guns in the house.
Wow.
And at about the same time, he had a 2-year-old sister drown in the canal. And I've never figured out the exact timing, but I know when I went to the gravestone, it was 1944. She was 4 years old and grandpa got taken away around the same time. So then I had another uncle that didn't talk till he was 6 years old. And he did make up for it later in life. But he was born in 1942, so he would have been 2 or 3 years old when all this trauma happened. He didn't talk till he was 6. And my grandmother never got over the passing of a little girl. So years later, they moved to America. They had a child. They named her the same name. And then my grandmother passed away from breast cancer in 1967. And so all of this stuff makes us who we are, right? 3 generations later. And my grandpa on my mom's side, he was a policeman in Amsterdam during World War II and hid Jews. And he saw some tremendously heinous things and it was never talked about. And there was anger. And I know there was plenty of verbal abuse in my mom's growing up. I think there was some pretty heavy-handedness. I wouldn't say the difference between harsh discipline and physical abuse. The line probably got close a few times. And so this distills down to who I am. I'm the child of these 2 parents who grew this way. And so then when you look at your kids, you want your kids to do better than you. Okay, so you want your finances to be better. You want your kids to do better. And we put a lot of pressure on kids and it goes on and on. And so I'm dealing, my kids are young adults now, and I really want them to do better than I did at their age. And I look at it and they're doing a little bit better than I did. But it takes what? It takes time. That 19-year-old knucklehead, sometimes they grow up at 22, sometimes 32. And for me, it was 42. So, yeah, I didn't mean to take you to all these crazy places, Lexi, but here we are.
It's a really interesting story. I think I've been kind of interested in that era or, time frame in the world right now. I've been reading a book called Land Rich, Cash Poor. And there's a lot of similarities between the story you just described and the family in that book. And I think that it's absolutely important that we look at and think about those things that are influencing how we move through the world today in agriculture, because it's influencing it in a big way and we don't realize how much. Man, what you said there about winter being hard, you're preaching to the choir on that one. I feel it in January here. I think they should have named it something other than January, something just really dirty and foul. But what you were saying there about sitting back and waiting and having the courage to let things grow while you do relatively nothing, or what feels like nothing to you. So hard. How do you decide to do that? I think a lot of farmers and ranchers, we're very strategical in trying to grow our businesses because it matters to us and it's hard to do. So we think very strategically about, how can I get that little extra bump? How can I get this advantage? When sometimes we need to stop pushing. How do we know when it's right to push and when it's not? Or how do you know?
Well, there's a time to reap and a time to sow, right?
Yeah.
It's in the Bible and it's in the famous song. And if you ever get a chance to listen to any Jim Rohn podcast, not the sportscaster, but the business philosopher Jim Rohn, Rohn, and he talks about the seasons of life. He's got a book called The Seasons of Life and how spring follows every winter. And he goes, I don't know what your winter looks like today. Maybe it's a divorce. Maybe it's a financial reversal. Maybe it's just winter. Maybe, fill in the blank, the death of a loved one. Just know that spring always follows winter. And sometimes that's the only thing we can hang on to. But then he says, when it's springtime, you need to get your ass in the field and start planting. He says, there's a reason there's lights on those big tractors because you've got to get the planting done in spring. And then in summer, you have to nurse that crop and you've got to hoe out the weeds. And again, whether it's a relationship, what little weeds do we have in our relationships? Little bickerings, what little points do we, what weed is going to come and grow up and choke out a relationship? What weed is going to arise and choke out our business? And then he talks about fall. Every summer is followed by fall. And he said, you must reap without excuse. He says, if you reap poorly, it's probably your fault. And if you reap richly, do so with gratitude. And know that winter always comes after fall. And so, when do we know to put the whip down? I've been telling people, that I quit raising bottle calves a year ago. And could a lot of money been made? A lot of money has been made since then. But what I associate with a bottle calf is how many can you buy with a day of work uptown? And if you've got to go work uptown 3 or 4 days to buy a bottle calf and a bag of milk, they're too expensive. If you can buy, back in the day, I could go put in a day of overtime and buy 4 or 5 bottle calves and 4 or 5 bags of milk. So there's a time, there's a time to sow, there's a time to reap, and there's a time to call it a winter. And right now, if you want to grow your cow herd, it's a winter. Everyone's asking the question, should I buy a cow? Should I do this? Should I do that? And if you listen to Gordon Hazard or read Gordon Hazard's books, he will tell you, and Bud Williams, they'll tell you when cattle prices are high, just replace one for one. You have to stay in business. So that's what I've done. I have not expanded the last 2 years, and it's killing me. It's killing me, but I'm not going to go borrow money to expand in this market. If I don't feel comfortable about it, it's just so valuable to stay the course. So then to answer your question, when do we know when to push and when do we know to pull back? A lot of that comes with, if you set a farm plan and you set goals, and I was always too good to do a budget or written goals in the past. If you set that plan, that not only works when times are tough, it's probably of more value when times are good. When do you liquidate? And it's like, well, you had no, if your plan was to grow 10% a year, then you need to just keep growing 10% a year. Don't say I'm going to sell half the herd because prices are high, or don't say I'm going to go borrow a bunch of money and double the herd because prices are high. Stay with your 10%. What does that look like? Have a plan, work the plan. It's so boring. It's so boring. I hate it.
Yeah. It's a careful balance. And I think that I like your analogy of the seasons. That's really helpful to think about it that way.
Does your business accept online payments, credit cards, or bank transfers? You're going to want to know about a tool called ThriveCart. I've been using this tool on my own website and on clients' websites for years and have been so happy with it. ThriveCart is a software tool you can use to design online checkouts with every option you can dream up. You can sell physical and digital products, connect to loads of other softwares you use for your website, accept payments, email marketing, and more. This is the most powerful tool that I use and the lowest cost one for my business. I recommend it for anyone who accepts online payments, who wants to increase their revenue or average order value on any type of product that you sell. In my show notes, you can find an affiliate link that I have for ThriveCart that gets you a great deal on a one-time payment, no subscription, and also allows me to earn affiliate income from this tool that I really enjoy and recommend. If you have any questions about how ThriveCart could work for your business, feel free to shoot me an email and I'd be happy to chat with you about it. Now, back to the show.
One of the other things I wanted to talk about, tied closely into what we've talked about so far, is I think we've talked about how your perspective on where you're at in relation to the rest of the world greatly affects your course of action in your business. And we don't realize how much so. It's kind of heavy on my mind right now how a lot of guys, especially generational guys, are feeling so much pressure to make it work, to not lose the family legacy, to get things to the next generation and to do it right, in parentheses. That pressure is unfathomable, I think, to a lot of us. How do we keep their perspective right so that we don't lose those guys and lose all that they've worked for?
So my age group, we grew up in the 70s. So whenever you grew up, it was awesome, right? You went in grandpa and grandma's house and it was awesome. You didn't know that they were dealing with debt. You didn't know that, who knew that grandpa and grandma didn't get along all the time, right? They never showed that to the grandkids. And so part of what we're dealing with is there's a false sense of how wonderful it was. And there's a false sense of how easy it was. Why is that? Because we were teenagers when that was happening. We grandpa and grandma didn't love bucking hay, but they loved having the grandkids around. So there was lots of food and it was a good time. But they only did it because they had to. They were hoping you and I would become doctors and lawyers and not become farmers. So first of all, we got to kind of admit that this romance that we have and this legacy. And again, that is a, how do I say this? That's a legacy media thing. You've got to leave your legacy. Well, who says you have to leave your legacy? If you don't have passion for the farm So back to the 6 cow guy growing to 7. How do you deal with that? Well, you have to have a tremendous amount of passion for what you're doing. So if you're in a position where you're getting pressure from a parent, from a grandparent, from society to do this or do that, you really have to have a grown-up talk and figure out where your passion is. And, that's as hard or a harder conversation with the guy that's got nothing to lose because he's lost everything. We're all prisoners of something, right? And sometimes we're prisoners of our own success. That's a hard talk. I had a chance to buy my parents' place, and they full boated me. We had a realtor come and look at it, and he says, "Well, it's worth between at that time 440 and 460." And my mom says, "Well, then we'd like 460,000." And I ended up trying to get an FSA loan. And there's actually, of all things, it's the craziest thing. There's asbestos in the creek that runs alongside our family farm. And so FSA said they could not finance a farm with asbestos in it. And I think they probably did me a favor, because already at that time, my cattle business had really outgrown the facilities there. And I had some problems with my mom on that. She wanted all the money, and then I couldn't get it to her fast enough. And I finally had to say no more. And my wife didn't really want the deal. So I had 2 unhappy women in my life.
That's
my mom, because I wasn't getting the deal done fast enough, and my wife, because she didn't want to do the deal. And, so at the end of the day, you have to take care of yourself. So, my advice that I would give someone that might be in a position where they're getting a lot of pressure, might be time to go away for a weekend with a yellow pad. Don't go to Vegas, or don't go rock climbing. Go someplace where you can relax and sit down with the yellow legal. It doesn't have to be yellow. It could be any color, right? You could grab the notepad underneath the Gideon Bible. And then, so here's where you get into business coaching. What do you want? What do you want on your gravestone? What 3 things would you like to be remembered for at the funeral? And if one of them is not, "Oh, I took over all the debt on the family farm and stressed my life away raising soybeans when really all I wanted to do was bale a little hay," that's something you have to deal with. And probably the sooner you deal with it, the better. Not very many kids are going to go tell mom and dad, "Well, why don't you sell half the farm to alleviate the financial stress?" But holy cow, if land is $15,000 an acre and you don't have a desire, if you don't have that burning desire to do X, to milk 1,000 cows, to do 2,000 acres of soybeans, whatever that is, if that is not your burning desire, please don't do that. I sat by an old dairyman once, and he goes, "You know what? I never really liked the cows." And I'm like, "Then what in the hell did you spend 45 years milking cows for?"
Yeah.
I just financially, I was financially well off. And I'm like, if you didn't like cows, then what and why? Why did you? Now, one thing we forget, historically, cows were milked for 2 reasons. One was to get rid of your row crops, and 2 was to get a butter check so you could buy groceries. So again, back to this romance, all these little dairies that dotted the countryside, a lot of those people didn't want a dairy, but that was the only way they could sell their crops, was through the cream check. And that was the only way they could make their payments. And people forget that. Now you see this the big guys, they do straight soybeans, they do straight corn, they do this monoculture, or they dairy. And those models have been very financially successful. But historically, the only reason you milk cows was, as a side business to take care of your other businesses. Mm-hmm. And will we get back there? I don't know, but here we are. And so we have to deal with what's going on today.
Yeah.
But I would recommend for anybody, if mom and dad are stressing you, get away from them for a while and figure out, because ultimately when you got, I assume you're married. When I got married and it said you were leaving your mom and dad and you were joining with your wife. So it's a good exercise to sit down and say, what do we want? What do we want on our gravestone? What do we want our kids to remember us for? Not to be drunken fools that drove too expensive of cars and went on vacations they couldn't afford, but also we don't want our kids to remember us as the people that stressed and could never make it to a little league game because, by God, we had to be at the farm. And so, again, there we are. We're balancing.
And I think a lot of people, when you say you got to get away and think and figure out what it is that where you're at, what you're passionate about, a lot of people's first instinct is to say, I can't get away. I can't leave. I got to be here. But I would encourage those people to realize that sometimes it's a life and death situation for you to get away for a few days.
Yeah. Life or death, potential divorce. And then sometimes you get away and if you get a little clarity and you go, oh my Lord, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
And when you're in the middle of it, back to the dairy industry, I spent the first 20, 30 years of my life tired. I never found a church service I could good enough to stay awake through the whole time. I slept through a Bob Seger concert. I slept at basketball games. I slept through a bachelor party. I mean, I spent my whole life tired. So I look back and I'm like, 90% of my poor decisions were caused by either alcohol or lack of sleep, generally a combination of the two. Yeah, I mean, you just get to a spot, where you're so tired, you feel so shitty, and then you start drinking, and that's a pretty deadly combination. That's hard on relationships, it's hard on families, it's hard on business, and frankly, it's hard on your body. At 50, you start seeing, I know some 50-year-old guys that have died of heart attacks, milked a lot of cows.
Yeah.
They're overweight, they drank too much, they constant stress. And so back to legacy media, if you are going, you go to a farm show and you see a 100-cow rotary milking parlor, just know that comes with about 12 employees. So that might be your dream, but if you're not good managing employees, my goodness, that'll give you a heart attack quicker than anything. So yes, if you sometimes you just have to get away from the stress just to get some clarity. And if you can have your spouse on board for that, that helps. That helps a lot.
Yeah. Well, you've shared a lot of wisdom today, and I appreciate the stories that you've shared. One of the things that I like to ask my guests, and it kind of relates to our conversation about mainstream media, is what is something positive or that brings light to this industry that you would tell other people to think about or focus on? Because we are a very pessimistic industry and we like to worry about the future. But it's important to recognize the good. And I think we've talked a lot about that today. But if you had one thing, what would you pass along?
I would recommend going to your local livestock show. Because you know what? Kids are still kids. And there's, this constant conversation, right? These poor kids today, how are they going to make it? They have no idea. They're little kids. They're having the time of their life. And then I've had the good fortune to go to 4 national FFA conventions. And yeah, my boy was an American farmer. I got to go to Indianapolis, 30 years after I was an American farmer. It's awesome. Now, a lot of it's funded by big ag, right? And they push agribusiness, this and that. But again, for those kids, this is as good as it gets. When I was born, Vietnam and the hippies and the beginning of free love, and I'm, Watergate, and I'm sure my parents are going, oh man, well, what's going to happen with this kid? And just have to, farming, everything changes, right? When the car business come along, the whip makers were out of business and the horse buggy people were out of business. But that created opportunities. And, now when I was a little kid, there was telephone operators. There's no telephone operators anymore, but there's plenty of other opportunities. So yeah, go to your local fair, go to your, get involved in FFA. I've seen guys on TikTok that are looking for wives, right? They're talking about being single and the dating scene. They're on Tinder and stuff like that. And I'm like, you need to go volunteer with your local 4-H club. You want to start meeting quality people, go volunteer at a charity auction, at a livestock auction, 4-H club, Little League, church. Don't go find one in the bar. So there's just so much good out there. And my goal is to, if I can find one person a day, pat them on the back, tell them you're doing good. And again, if you're even living in America, you're ahead of 90% of the world. If you own 3 or 4 acres in America, you're ahead of 97% of the world. If you've got 30 cows in America, you're ahead of 99.8% of the world, and you're ahead of 98% of Americans. And don't let anybody kick you in the teeth when that's what you're doing. So,
yeah, I appreciate that. DL, I always enjoy talking to you and listening to your content. If folks want to hear more from you, get some of the tips that you share, both business and just perspective related, where can they do that at?
I just got on YouTube. I've been there so shortly a time. It's still DL and Randy Lautenbach because Hello Friend was taken. And then I'm also, if you look me up on TikTok, it's DL Lautenbach or Hello Friend. And I don't know where I'm going to go with this. Does it become public speaking? Is it some coaching? Or do I just keep doing TikToks? And, right now I think I'm helping. I really feel that, like I said, I was a turd when I was a kid. And I feel that what I'm doing now, I'm paying debts to some of those people that took care of me when I was being a turd. They're in the cemetery now. I'm paying it forward, Lexi.
Yeah. Well, I think you have a lot of open doors to take it any direction you want. I appreciate you so much being on the podcast and sharing with my listeners. So thanks for coming back and doing another round here.
Awesome. And one thing I'll say, 90% of my TikToks are fueled by questions. So ask questions. I answer 98% of them. I did block the F word. I blocked Trump. I blocked Biden, and I blocked sentient. But if you ask a question without those words in it, 99% of the time you're going to get an answer. And a lot of times I'll turn it into a video and it turns into a conversation. It's awesome.
Love it. Probably wise of you on blocking those words.
It eliminated a lot of stress there in the last 2-3 years.
Yeah, I bet so. Perfect. So if you guys have questions, go hit up DL. I'm sure he'll give you an answer. Thanks so much.
Love it. Thank you, Lexi.
If you've enjoyed spending time with us today, please take a moment to review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or join the conversation on social media. Do you have a topic you would like to discuss or know someone with a story to share? Apply to be a guest on the podcast at farmingonpurpose.com. You can follow the host of Farming on Purpose, Lexi, on your favorite social media platforms for more content by searching for Farming on Purpose. And remember, if you look around your table and aren't inspired by the people there, it's time to find a new seat.